The call came in at 0400 hours on October 9, 2019, to the Orkney Islands police station from a man named Colin MacLeish, a commercial fisherman operating out of Stromness Harbour. MacLeish reported finding what he described as human remains on the southeastern beach of Hoy Island, specifically near the old stone bothy that had been abandoned since the 1970s. The duty officer, Constable Fiona Kirkwall, noted in her initial report that MacLeish sounded shaken, his voice unsteady, and that he repeatedly insisted the remains were not normal, that there was something wrong with them, something he couldn't explain. Kirkwall dispatched a response unit and tagged the case as a potential homicide, standard protocol for any discovery of unidentified human tissue. What she did not know, what none of them could have known, was that by sunrise, the case would be reclassified 3 times, escalated to the National Crime Agency, and ultimately sealed under a non-disclosure directive that remains in effect to this day. MacLeish met the responding officers on the beach, a stretch of black sand and jagged basalt that curved along the base of cliffs so steep they seemed to lean over the water like the shoulders of giants. The wind was brutal that morning, carrying sleet horizontally across the shore, and visibility was less than 50 meters. MacLeish led them to the bothy, a small stone structure with a collapsed roof and walls thick with lichen, and pointed to the interior. Inside, spread across the dirt floor like a discarded garment, was a skin. Not human skin in the conventional sense, not the remains of a body or a section of epidermis torn from a victim. It was an entire skin, whole and intact, roughly the size and shape of a human adult, but with a texture and quality that immediately registered as wrong. Constable Ewan Drever, who had been with the force for 16 years and had processed everything from drownings to farm accidents, later testified in his confidential deposition that his first thought was that it looked like a wetsuit. But when he knelt down and touched it, when he felt the slick, oily surface and the strange density of the tissue beneath, he knew it was organic, it was real, and it was not human. The skin was dark grey, almost black in places, with patches of lighter silver that caught the weak morning light and seemed to shimmer like fish scales underwater. It was approximately 170 centimeters in length, with clear delineations where limbs would have been, a tapered section that suggested a head, and along the sides, faint striations that resembled gills or the textured hide of a marine mammal. There were no wounds, no tears, no signs of violence. It appeared to have been shed, removed carefully and deliberately, as if someone had stepped out of it the way one might step out of a coat. Driver radioed for backup and requested a forensic team. But even as he did so, he felt a growing unease, a prickling at the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the cold. MacLeish stood outside the bothy, refusing to come back in, his arms wrapped around himself, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When Drever asked him how he had found it, MacLeish said he had been checking his creels at dawn and had seen a woman walking along the shore. She was naked, he said, her skin pale as milk, her hair long and dark, and she was moving toward the water with a strange, unsteady gait, as if she were injured or disoriented. He called out to her, concerned, but she didn't respond. She reached the surf, waded in up to her waist, and then dove beneath the waves, and she didn't come back up. MacLeish said he waited for 10 minutes, scanning the water, expecting her to surface, but she never did. Concerned, he went to the bothy to see if she had left any belongings, and that's when he found the skin. Drever asked if he had seen anyone else, any vehicles, any signs of a struggle. MacLeish shook his head. There was nothing. Just the woman, the water, and the skin. Drever made a note of the statement, but even as he wrote it down, he felt the story pulling at something deeper, something older than police procedure and forensic science. He had grown up in Orkney. He knew the legends. Every child raised on these islands knew the stories of the Selkies, the seal people who could shed their skins and walk on land, who took human lovers and bore human children, and who would always return to the sea if they found their stolen skins. But those were stories, folklore, the kind of thing you told tourists over a pint in the pub. They weren't supposed to appear in official police reports with timestamps and evidence tags. The forensic team arrived by helicopter at 0730 hours, a three-person unit from the Edinburgh division specializing in unidentified remains. Dr. Ailsa Monroe, the lead pathologist, was the first to examine the skin in situ. She spent 20 minutes documenting it with photographs and measurements, her gloved hands moving over the tissue with practiced efficiency. But Trevor noticed the way her expression changed as she worked. The clinical detachment gave way to something else, confusion, then fascination, then something that looked disturbingly close to fear. She ordered the skin bagged and transported to the mobile lab unit they had set up in the parking area near the harbour, and for the next 6 hours, she and her team ran every test in their protocol. Tissue samples were taken, DNA swabs were collected, spectrometry, histology, electron microscopy, all of it conducted with the rigor of a major criminal investigation, and every result came back the same: non-human. Mammalian, yes, but not from any species in the database. The cellular structure was dense, adapted for extreme pressure, rich in myoglobin, consistent with deep-diving marine mammals. But the dermal layer showed anomalies, patterns that suggested a flexibility and resilience far beyond anything found in seals, dolphins, or whales. And there were trace elements, chemical compounds that didn't match any known biological markers. Dr. Monroe filed her preliminary report at 1400 hours, and by 1600 hours, 2 agents from the National Crime Agency had arrived on Hoy Island and taken custody of the evidence. The case was reclassified as a matter of national security. All personnel involved were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The official explanation given to the local media, who had caught wind of the incident through scanner traffic, was that a damaged wetsuit had been found on the beach and mistakenly reported as human remains. The story was buried within 48 hours. But the people who were there, the ones who saw the skin, who touched it, who felt the unnatural cold that radiated from it even after it had been removed from the beach, they knew better. Trevor knew better, MacLeish knew better, and Dr. Monroe, who would resign from her position 6 months later and move to the mainland without explanation, she knew better too. And here, in this moment where the facts dissolve into something darker and more uncertain, I want you to consider what this means. If the official record can be rewritten so easily, if evidence can be classified and witnesses silenced, then how many other encounters have been buried? How many other things have washed up on remote shores, been logged in reports that were never made public, been carried away by agents who answer to divisions that don't officially exist? If you've heard stories, if you've seen things that didn't make sense, if you felt the weight of a truth that no one will acknowledge, leave your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just one incident, this is a pattern, and the ocean is full of them. MacLeish never went back to fishing. He sold his boat within a month and moved inland to Kirkwall, where he took a job in a hardware store and refused to talk about what he had seen. But people who knew him said he changed after that morning. He would flinch at the sound of running water. He stopped eating fish, and on certain nights, when the wind came in from the sea, he would stand at his window and stare out into the darkness with an expression that his wife described as haunted. Trevor remained on the force, but requested a transfer to traffic duty, a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. When pressed, he would only say that he didn't want to work cases involving the coast anymore. Dr. Monroe's resignation was quietly accepted. and her personnel file, which should have been a matter of public record, was sealed. The mobile lab unit that processed the skin was decommissioned and scrapped. The photographs and samples taken that day were never entered into evidence. The case file, as far as official records are concerned, does not exist. But the skin existed. It was real. And somewhere, in a refrigerated storage facility, whose location is known only to a handful of people, it still exists. Catalogued under a designation that has no meaning to anyone outside a very specific chain of command, stored alongside other items that defy explanation, it waits. And the question that haunts everyone who saw it, the question that none of them can answer, is simple. If that was a skin, then what was wearing it? And if it was shed, then what walked out of it and into the sea? Was it a woman, as MacLeish described, pale and disoriented, moving toward the water with the inevitability of something returning home? Or was it something else? Something that had learned to mimic human form, that had walked among us unnoticed, that had relationships and routines and a life built on land until the call of the ocean became too strong to resist. The SELKIE legends speak of a curse, of creatures caught between two worlds, neither fully human nor fully animal, bound by a skin that is both prison and salvation. They speak of women who marry fishermen and bear children and live quiet lives in coastal villages, always with a sadness in their eyes, always staring at the sea. And they speak of the day, years or decades later, when the skin is found, hidden in an attic or a locked chest, or buried beneath the floorboards, and the woman sheds her human life like a coat and returns to the waves, leaving behind only questions and grief. But those are stories. Folklore, the kind of thing rational people dismiss as superstition. Until the forensic report comes back stamped with the words non-human tissue, until the DNA analysis reveals markers that don't exist in any known genome, until the witnesses sign legal documents promising never to speak of what they saw, and the evidence disappears into a black site, and the only thing left is the memory of something impossible lying on the floor of an abandoned bothy on a remote island where the wind never stops howling. If you're still listening, if you've followed this account to its end, then you carry a responsibility now. You know what was found. You know what the official record refuses to acknowledge. And if you believe that these truths need to be preserved, that these incidents need to be documented and shared, then I'm asking you to do something. Press the like button on this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not for entertainment, but for preservation, because the agencies that classify these reports, that scrub the databases and silence the witnesses, they rely on secrecy. They rely on the assumption that most people won't believe, won't care, won't look deeper. But we do. We look deeper. We ask the questions that aren't supposed to be asked, and we keep the channel alive so that the next time something washes ashore, the next time a police report gets buried, the next time someone sees something that shouldn't exist, there's a record, there's a warning, because the ocean is not empty. It is full of things we have forgotten how to see, things that have learned to hide in plain sight, things that will continue to surface no matter how many files get sealed or how many witnesses are paid to stay quiet. MacLeish died in 2023. Heart attack, the death certificate said, but his widow told a friend that in his final days he kept talking about the woman on the beach, kept saying she was calling to him, that he could hear her voice in the wind. Trevor retired early and moved to the Highlands, away from the coast, away from the sound of the waves. Dr. Monroe published a paper in a fringe scientific journal under a pseudonym, detailing anomalous tissue samples she had encountered in her career. Samples that suggested the existence of undocumented marine species with anatomical structures inconsistent with known evolutionary models. The paper was ignored by the mainstream scientific community and quietly removed from circulation 6 months after publication. But the people who read it, the ones who connected the dots, they understood. They knew what she was talking about. They knew what she had seen. The skin is still there, in the dark, in the cold, stored under fluorescent lights that never turn off, in a room where the temperature is kept at exactly 2 degrees Celsius, catalogued and preserved and studied by people whose names you will never know, whose findings will never be published, whose work exists in the margins of official acknowledgement. And somewhere in the waters off Hoy Island, something swims. Something that once walked on land, that once wore the shape of a woman, that once stood on a beach at dawn and made the choice to return. And if the legends are true, if the stories passed down through generations hold even a fragment of reality, then she is not alone. There are others. There have always been others. And they are still here, still moving through the deep, still shedding their skins in secret places, still crossing the threshold between worlds. The police report confirmed the item was non-human tissue, but it didn't say what it was. It couldn't, because there is no classification for something that should not exist, no protocol for evidence that rewrites the boundaries of the possible. Only silence, only secrecy, and the cold, undeniable knowledge that the ocean keeps its own, and always will, and that we are merely visitors on its shores.